Welcome to episode 3 of the Uncharted Territory podcast. I'm delighted to be back once again with my co-explorer, Sam X. Today, exploring an interesting subject that has many nuances to it. And in fact, Sam, in the last episode, we touched very briefly on it. I almost ushered us past the conversation around this change in the international standards in the financial markets. And as part of the reason why we did that is because we had a very focused conversation last time. And if you missed that, I encourage you to go back to watch episode 2, where we talked about the kind of emergence of the financial reset off the back of the Silicon Valley bank collapse. But it's such an important subject, what we're going to talk about today, this what seems innocuous, an ISO code. And, many of you probably recognize ISO standard codes on the back of technology products and all these kind of things. But this particular change has a number of very significant manifestations that will affect the future of the financial world. So we're going to extract that today in today's conversation as a standalone episode. And there's been a lot going on, Sam, this week.
We've both had full-on weeks, and I think it's part of the energy of things, both ramping up in the mainstream and opening up in a kind of creative way for a lot of people. And I think with the catalyst we touched on last week, Dan, the first, bank runs and bank failures and the kind of ramifications of that, I'm certainly seeing, in my networks and a lot of the calls I'm having and the contact I'm having, that people are starting to, that's a catalyst to get them moving, which is great because people know. And when I talked last time, I've been talking about this topic for a couple of years, but a lot of people have been taking info in, but now it's become visceral. That kind of catalyst is there to move. And actually a few talks that people have booked me in to speak in the summer, because I'm happy to speak whenever suits them. This week, they've been brought forward, so it's kind of come from June to April. And I think that's great because it means there's urgency to, again, not just to act, but to get educated and get clear. And and it's, even in the topic we're going to look at today, it seems like a tiny little binary thing. But as always, there's so many threads that come out of it. And probably the reason we didn't come back to it, Dan, because there are always, when we talk, so many threads that come out of it. But that is what you get when you look at it from a holistic picture. And I think looking at it and going that, almost starting with that as a little binary thread and then going the journey will help people to understand, always that line again, the good, the bad and the ugly and the nuances within it, and give you a better understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, and in preparation for our conversation today, the biggest takeaway, apart from some of the technicalities of what we'll get into and what they all mean, is really the requirement right now to be educated on these changes. That really does fundamentally underpin everything that we set out to do here on this podcast, and everything else we're working on is really that piece of around awareness and education and simplifying things, because demystifying. You hear ISO 220. What does this number mean? What's it all about?
Well, I've got a perfect example, Dan, because it came across my desk this morning, on my digital desk, came across the computer, and it's a great example exactly that, where if you get educated, you don't get pulled around by fake stories around this. Okay, so something came through on a group I'm in. And I understand if you don't understand this language or scary, you could take this info and go, wow, that's really interesting. And it's always the binaries again, because what it was a kind of little video clip of somebody saying, amazing news, the deep state SWIFT system has been taken down to be replaced with the ISO 222 quantum financial system, freedom's coming, it's all this. So that hopium angle again. And if you don't understand what the messaging system is and look at it, and all the stuff we can talk about, you can research. It's all there, backed up. It's it's all available. This is not deep conspiracy, left field stuff. It's all there, verifiable. Once you understand it, you're not going to get pulled into that, idea, which really is nonsense. Because SWIFT, a part of the, it's a changeover of SWIFT themselves. It's not SWIFT being taken down by some freedom-loving, ISO kind of company, white hat entity. So it's a great example again of the way through being manipulated by those stories, whether they are the hopium or the extreme fear porn, is education.
Yes.
And getting clear. So that's a great example of how you, across all things, you mitigate those extremes and the confusion just by getting clear on the baseline, and then you free yourself up from being sort of manipulated emotionally and mentally and practically.
Absolutely. And also, Sam, I stand corrected. Yeah, I used the incorrect numbers. It's ISO 200.
I always can.
Yeah,
I've been giving talks this. I always go two when I start. How many zeros is it? 200.
Yes, yeah.
But 200. I've got it. 20022.
I've got it here on my screen as well. Yeah. And again, it's like, what on earth is that thing? Don't worry, we're going to get into it.
Yeah.
And it has some serious implications. Again, as Sam said, there's positives, there's negatives, there's possible ramifications, there's possible benefits.
Dan, if we were, which we're avoiding, we really want to be the antithesis of. If we were doing a clickbait, mouth open, oh my god, you could be saying, oh my god, ISO 20022 has come to enslave us. It's dystopia. It's launched this week. Or we could go, it's here to save us. That drama. Whereas really, we're going to look at it quietly and calmly and look at what it is. And it's neither. It's neither a savior nor is it complete dystopia. It's just a shift that's happening.
Yeah, we were playing around with some titles before today's episode, and we say, given that we're talking about Swift, and I say swiftly moving towards a dystopian future, and what was your comeback, Sam?
I saw it coming. We're going to get clickbait now. It's happening. Often they say it's all happening, and then you click on. They don't know what's happening, and it sounds like it's a big development. But I think that's also partly what's interesting about we're going to shine light on, that it's not sudden development either. Because I think that's also what hypes up the news, as if, oh my God, suddenly something's happened. This has been written about and publicly knowledgeable for many years.
Yes,
that's why I've been talking about this messaging system standard coming in my talks for 2 years, but it goes way back before then.
Yes,
so again, that's also by getting a bigger picture view of it. If you weren't aware of that, and understandably so, you've got more interesting things to look into than international messaging systems. But you could be idea of suddenly they've switched something on. And it's whereas this has just been a roadmap, and by knowing that roadmap, seeing it, it's also helped, as give me a much bigger picture of both the legacy financial structure and also the blockchain system that's coming. So a lot of my forward looking and the reason I feel like I have a good handle on where things might go is because these roadmaps exist.
Yes,
but it's not guesswork. It's a lot of it's there.
Yeah. So we'll define what the ISO standard is shortly, so you can get some context around that. And you're right. It's been in motion. Swift announced their plans to migrate to this in 2014.
Yeah.
We'll unpack what that all means in a minute. But before we start, and continue on this journey, talking about navigating the complexities of the current environment that we're in, we kicked off our Navigating the Financial Reset group this Wednesday, Sam, our first workshop.
Yeah, and it was great. It's always great to work with people, and get out of that I know we do it a lot anyway in our lives of in-person events, and that's what I love. And although we're doing it online, it had that feeling because it's coming together and sharing. And the big thing is getting out of fear into action, and we starting to see that shift in people. As you know, Dan, that's what excites me more than anything. It's not about exactly where people's journeys go. That's their personal sovereign way, but just the fact that might be more out of fear and into creativity and kind of excitement and education is a real shift. So I love the fact we started that journey, and feels good.
Yeah,
for us and them. It's for everybody. It's a collective, collective journey.
Yeah, we're talking obviously through different types of exercises we can do to take stock of our own kind of financial circumstances in the context of the wider environment, looking at different kind of goals and aspirations we'll have. And, as we talked about within the program, we have to lead by example. So I've been pulling all my financial details together, getting my logins from some of the old bank accounts that I've logged in for a long time, and really taking stock of where we are. So I think it's such a powerful time during, preparedness is everything. I think this is really the fundamental building blocks, and education and awareness is that first building block of the macro external environment. But also we've got to shine a light on our own financial environment and the kind of mental state, emotional state of mind I think we have around what's happening. Absolutely. And also what's happening with our own money, because it's an emotive subject.
Yeah, and it's almost like if we even look at last week, we're talking about banks collapsing and losing faith in banks, and a lot of people listeners will have lost faith in banks many years ago already. But this is just the height, and I've known I don't have faith in them, but I really need to take action. And if in essence the sovereign path of whether it's crypto or just taking charge of your finances in other ways, it's about taking responsibility. So it's about being your own bank. isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
So, and the outsourcing of things is what they rely on, because outsourcing has allowed us all to be lazy about our organization. Absolutely. I'm including myself for many years, very lazy about getting organized with all my things. And this has been a catalyst and a call to, if I'm going to be on my own bank and I'm going to be sovereign, then I do need to have good systems in place. And I do need to clear up those niggling things that I've never got round to, like that email account that I'm confused which password I've locked out of something on that app for the last 3 years. This is the time for me. And it's been great to sort those out. And it's cleared. It's something to good sort out anyway.
Yes.
Even if you weren't looking at, shifting your finances and taking more power back. So it's really helpful. And it is the baseline, Dan, isn't it? It's the baseline combined with the energy shift to then lay the foundation for doing things differently.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you want to know more about what we're talking about, you can just look in the links in the comments and you can find out about the Navigating the Financial Reset group that we've just touched upon. But really excited to kick that off. Lots of anticipation around that. So let's dive in, Sam. We've been talking about these strange codes, these international standards, these new messaging standard. When we talk about messaging standard, you think about what? A new telegram. And is this a new signal channel? Is it a new way for us to communicate? No. Tell us a little bit about this transition from the SWIFT standard to the new.
Well, I'm probably going to move the question quite quickly back to you, Dan, because you've got more experience in the kind of legacy banking world from your previous career. But generally, this is a shift towards the blockchain standard. So it is shifting away from what we've had, and I think it's important to understand that. Settlements, haven't really advanced as quickly as transactions have. Mm-hmm. So we have so much tech going around today, and as we all know, we can do amazing transactions on all sorts of applications very rapidly. But what was important in my sort of journey learning about the financial system under the hood of it was that settlements actually are really clunky and are kind of stuck in the dark ages, which leads to lots of problems and also leads to sort of parasite middlemen making more money because think about a SWIFT payment to Australia today. It might be 4 or 5 days. It's holding in escrow, and we won't go into the mechanics. I always want to talk about a lay audience, but generally, it is an advance in cross-border payments and interoperability between different countries, different systems. So that's it in a nutshell. I don't want to get too technical. And
yes.
And you're better prepared, possibly from your background, to look at it.
Well, yeah. I mean, you've done a really great job in a nutshell. So when we talk about financial messages, we're not talking about SMSs and Telegram messages. It's really about the mechanism by which things like payments, securities, and trade-related transactions and messages get passed through the financial system. So, if you've ever sent an international payment in the UK, you may have used a SWIFT code, but more broadly, SWIFT is the system by which these financial mechanisms are underpinned. And from just looking at it from a purely operational standpoint, from my kind of background in banking, is that yes, that here we go, interoperability. It's an improving standardization across different financial institutions, across border. It allows easier integration, increased efficiency, enhanced data quality, better customer experience. It's faster, more reliable. So there is a lot of benefits to this particular standard, but there are a number of problems and risks that we'll talk about. But even just keeping on the operational standpoint, there's a huge cost in implementing this type of transition. The migration will inevitably be complex. It will be timely. It'll take time. There'll be all these kind of, having had experience in the banking world, there's some very old legacy systems. So it's definitely going to be a time-consuming and costly process. And plus, there are other risks. When you've got a standardized system, cybersecurity risks are a problem. Operational risks could be an issue. It could raise regulatory concerns. I know this is all the boring stuff, but it's all part of the parcel. Where I get concerned and excited, because it is something that paves the way towards the kind of blockchain revolution that we'll talk about. The deeper concern really is this type of enhanced messaging system is really the tools that will underpin and accelerate the rise of central bank digital currencies.
Yeah.
Not only that, and again, we'll look at central bank digital currencies with nuance because, again, that kind of shock face, there's almost this expectation. There's almost people are almost willing for it to end up in a social credit style system.
Yeah, and also that feeling that it goes from, cash today, midnight, and then tomorrow wake up Chinese, social credit score system, and that kind of, again, those binaries. So it is important to, and I think your point's going to lead me into looking at a differentiate that, again, the tech is neutral.
Yeah.
And the blockchain aspect of it is completely neutral and has major advantages, and can be used, as we say, for all sorts of better decentralized ways, cheaper. It is almost like leave that part of central bank digital currency aside. And the real issue is top-down smart contracts.
Yes.
Because in a sense, that is the only part, it's that and digital IDs.
Yes.
So if we just leave digital IDs aside for a moment, in terms of blockchain, the blockchain standard is not a problem at all. It's actually a great advance, which is why it's inevitable, because we're moving towards that, and it solves so many issues, and it brings this dark age settlement into the modern age where it does cut out parasite middle entities. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's more efficient, it's more secure. But really, it's that programmable aspect that, again, always giving this caveat, the smart contract itself isn't an evil piece of machinery, because we can, if we were agreeing a smart contract by ourselves, me and you, Dan, or anybody our listeners between each other, that's just like creating a really good contract that triggers very effectively based on certain conditions being met.
Yes.
So it's a more efficient way of all the deals we make anyway.
Absolutely.
So the only issue, again, it's the huge issue. When I say it's the only issue, it's the massive, absolutely elephant in the room, real problematic issue, but it is clear to say what it is. It's not the blockchain aspect. It is the top-down, dictating of smart contracts onto your own, currency, and how those contracts, are triggered without your say and your consent. And again, they might argue that you've got consent through a democratic system, whatever. But as we've seen through the COVID years, that's not really how things play out. So I really want to be clear, that's the issue, not the blockchain aspect.
Agreed. Yeah. So the technology itself is an issue. But I do actually want to take the opportunity to underscore that this new messaging framework, because of its more detailed and granular capability, it will enable greater level of granularity of financial data to be transmitted, which means that, for example, a central bank digital currency could be programmed to automatically execute a payment when certain conditions are met, or complete a specific task, or expire over a certain time period, as we've seen already some of the in the Chinese markets, where your central bank digital currencies, where they're trialing it, will have an expiry date, so you have to use the cash by a certain period of time. But these are, as you said quite rightly and importantly, these functionalities in their own right are harmless. It's only when the state or central actors start to impose conditions around it. For instance, policymakers, they're already talking about green central bank digital currencies, smart central bank digital currencies. And with these potential applications, that's where we could see the application of these technologies to incentivize certain transactions, for instance, if they're in the interest of certain narratives, or penalize. Yep. As we've seen with the kind of vaccine mandates, this type, the deeper concern as a result of what we've seen for the last couple of years, quite rightly, has led to a level of vigilance that is hyper-vigilant, because we are now more wary of the potential application of these things. But it is important, as you said, Sam, to recognize that the technology itself can be used in a very positive way when it's decentralized, when it's in the hands of the individuals and the people using it. It's only problematic when the centralized authorities start to impose.
Well, this is where you get a really important comparison between, let's just use Bitcoin example, but open source permissionless blockchains, where you are interacting it and you decide how you're interacting with it. It's permissionless. Okay, what the central banks and the the nation states are creating are almost walled gardens, permissioned blockchain. So often they won't talk about blockchain technology. They'll talk about DLTs, which is distributed ledger technology, which is the same technology, but they are kind of differentiating between the kind of Bitcoin idea of blockchain and actually a completely private permission system where, they set the rules. And I think that's the real shift to understand. Is it's the same baseline tech, but it's the antithesis. That's what's so interesting. The polarities existing again within the same technology. So CBDC is the antithesis of using permissionless blockchain, where like Bitcoin, you can be involved in that blockchain and use it without having to give up any data. Just get yourself a wallet and you act as you want to do it. Their version is literally, you come into our system if you meet all these requirements. You give up all your data, otherwise you're out or you're locked out. So they're setting all the rules, and that's the real issue with it.
Yes.
That's a really important one. I know it gets a bit technical terms, but hopefully I can kind of capture the difference between this whole thing of permissionless, which, to integrate with look at Bitcoin, Dan, you don't need to speak to anybody, say, can I interact with the Bitcoin blockchain? You can go and do that today. You have to give your name, your ID, and you can go and get a wallet. Somebody can send some Bitcoin today. The Central Bank Digital Currencies is something where it's an enclosed wall garden where, to use it, you've got to be validated, you've got to be signed up, probably have an ID to go with it, and they're setting the rules, So that's the key, crucial difference to understand.
Yeah, and that's where the very real concerns play out in terms of central bank digital currencies in themselves, the programmatic nature of them, and the fact that this particular standard we're talking about really will provide the framework and infrastructure for that to progress the world of central bank digital currencies. But even without that shift, this is long in the development. There's actually a website called CBDC Tracker, I think .org. You'd have to look it up. We'll put it in the description. But you can already see where these types of currencies have been trialed. But it's important not to get dragged into the idea that it's inevitable that these technologies will have incentives and penalties, but it's very understandable given the context in which we currently live, particularly around this kind of net zero approach, the idea of green central bank digital currencies, where there might be incentives or penalties based upon certain environmental criteria, whether it's carbon emissions, energy efficiency, or use of renewable energy, or if you get into more the social elements, the kind of equity and diversity and inclusion kind of narratives, then you might receive incentives for supporting certain businesses that particularly support underrepresented groups, which on the surface doesn't sound like a bad thing, supporting marginalized groups. But it's when your choice is impeded by centralized authorities that those things become problematic. So,
and they're dictating what are the good causes and why, and as we know,
yes,
with science that we'd question, and all sorts of agendas behind it. So absolutely, they've got so many tools with it to economically corral people and again reward people, and that's the real why it's a powerful tool for them, is to in a time where they're going to be squeezing, people are being squeezed, as we know, and that squeeze is going to continue through the financial reset. When this tech comes in, but the potentiality really is you get a little bit of a boom after it. And I always talk about that because unfortunately that's the idea there'd be mass resistance to actually having that squeeze released a bit and having a little bit more of an economic boom because it's a bit of a reset means that on a day-to-day level, a lot of people will be more comfortable, more looked after. So it's hard to envisage, and again, I can't see the future, who knows, but it's hard to envisage such a mass feeling of resistance to that switch over, because also it's a long journey to get to where they potentially want to go to. Okay.
Yes, agreed.
And it's not, that point is not overnight, and it's more potentially for, the generations, below us, Dan, even is that, it will be a totalitarian tiptoe is my thesis.
Yep.
It won't be overnight because people wouldn't go for it. And I think also they're quite happy for people to push the binaries. Even if you're sounding the alarm, we're sounding the alarm, and absolutely we need to sound the alarm and look at dangers. But what's challenging to a lay audience is, if people aren't aware of agendas, if you sound the alarm too strongly saying, when CBDC comes in, you won't be allowed to do this, do that, do that. When it comes in, it will be almost, I'd argue, look exactly the same for quite a period. Therefore, it makes, that's often how they work things. They push that, quite happy to really be shouting from the rooftops, the extreme level. But actually, when it comes, it isn't. So people kind of go, "What are you on about?" That was a bit, it's not that bad. It's just the same. But they get there slowly.
Yes.
And this is the point of, expanding the Overton window.
Yes, the boiling frog. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing, and we're seeing. I just saw, came across the desk again that John Cunliffe from the Bank of England, using that word, if we have a central bank digital currency, and that's they know they're going to have a central bank digital currency, right?
Of course,
but
exactly.
they're playing they're playing the idea of an organic story of we're looking at it. But what's so fun is the kind of disconnect in the language, which was talking in terms of ifs and possibilities, and then going quite into interesting minutiae about how it would work.
Yes,
sort of about certain wallets and amounts, whatever. So in the same, which is what they do in the same sentence from the same paragraph, they've gone from saying, well, it's a possibility, into really quite detailed how it's going to be. And that is part of the Overton window, which is just opening up people to the idea, and it won't come overnight. And a good friend of mine made this really good point. They do that with so many of the agendas that are playing out at the moment, Dan. I think a good example would be, say, even the supply chain issues. A lot of those are manipulated at the moment. Like the tomatoes disappeared from the supermarket, right? So people are struggling to get hold of tomatoes, but a lot of people are screaming rooftops, look, you're going to have nothing soon, it's crazy. But it comes back again, and it just gets people used to a certain level of shifting without it ever being enough to, what I'd say, really shake a lot of the masses out of their comfort zone. So same with the bank going down. A lot of people would fear, oh my God, it's all going to go down. No, they've pulled that first plug, then it will calm down, but already that Overton window is expanding. So that's really massaging. There's so many ways for them to kind of massage the narrative and lead people. And again, I don't say that from a point of futile to resist, whatever. I just say that from realistic. I always want to look at what is playing out. How are they like to play out? There's loads of stuff we can do, but it's not going to be an overnight switch over. And it's important to look at the nuanced sides of how it may play out, because that gives us a better clue of how we can navigate ourselves, Dan. And out of fear that we need to take action and start moving, but it's not an overnight process either.
Yeah, I mean, we could easily descend into a wide overview of central bank digital currencies. I think that is a subject we should pick up in a future episode, because it does require that nuance, and there is a lot of fears, and quite rightly and understandably, those fears are there, and they're very real fears because, as we talked about, they can be programmable. It can allow governments to control how the currency is used. It could lead to a loss of autonomy, privacy, civil liberties. It can be used to increase surveillance and centralized control by governments. And, those are very real risk factors. It's almost an inevitability that central bank digital currencies will be rolled out, but the nature in which and how they'll be used is yet to be determined. And we've almost got this really kind of negative viewpoint on everything. As almost, we have this really bleak future. And whilst, again, I can understand why, it is important to anticipate what could be a eventuality. That's all about risk mitigation. We started talking about risk mitigation on Wednesday. It's important, when we're assessing the landscape, to look at those possibilities. But we also have to look at how our culture has shifted in the last few decades to become so fatalistic. On one hand, we pointed the fingers at those who were very alarmist during the COVID chapter, very fatalistic around climate. But then we catch ourselves doing the same thing about potential authoritarian or totalitarian realities. And again, I take that very seriously. But at the same time, if we accept it as a foregone conclusion, then what are we going to end up doing? It just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, and they want people on the other side of the fence to believe that and to be preparing for that, because that's leads into an action. Also, is a they want to feel like you don't have options, and you do have options.
Yes.
And I want to say that, in a sense, what have we seen? I know you know this. I know lots of people. Somebody said it on our first workshop, Dan, that they were so much happier. They've created so much good stuff since 2020, and I know plenty of people like that. So necessity is the mother of invention, isn't it?
Yes.
So if I look at as they ramp that stuff up, then that creates the need for alternatives that we can build. And so alternative economies, alternative ways of going. So because already it's not like there's that world of finance, there's nothing else. Well, yes, they're building that, but then that forces great creation, in the pockets and niches, to create other solutions, look at things differently. So I always go, we can get stuck in kind of resisting, the shifts. And I always like to reframe it of whoever's in charge or whoever's got nefarious agenda, regardless, things are shifting, and we're in a technological shift as well. So if we can look at that, stop resisting, like being stuck in resistance, and go, hang on, well, this is a really right time to get together and think about better solutions. But things are popping up all over. And when we talk about blockchain tech, we'll touch on it, I'm sure, more. And we're going to touch on all sorts of things in the next months and ahead, Dan. But there are improved solutions coming up through blockchain to all the problems that we really struggle with, like big tech. And think about internet search engines. Think about I use Brave browser. That's a Web3 innovation. Yes. I use pre-search for my search. That's decentralized search engine, part of a Web3 revolution. So that's all come out of the need to react against the monopoly of big tech and the agendas. So that is flourishing. So rather than be just beholden to those ones, resist that. If we can support the flourishing decentralized things and get involved with them and bring our own creative ideas, there's so much that can be done.
Yeah, I'm so pleased you say that, Sam, because it represents a really important pivot point in this conversation. Because whilst I may have contributed to painting quite a bleak picture myself in the last 10 minutes or so, the reality is, opening up this conversation around this new financial messaging standard, what we've described in the last section is really the centralized application of it, and the top-down application of it. And what you've alluded to there, Sam, which is critically important, and again, it underpins and underscores the need for education and awareness, because right now the counterbalance to that, in the much more positive side, is that decentralized blockchain systems do offer solutions to the risks associated with central bank digital currencies. Yeah. This is the opportunity. But the problem I see, Sam, is that because of the fear around central bank digital currencies and the fatalism and the alarmism and the misinformation, misinformation isn't just a term that's reserved for grand narratives. Yeah. We see it within our own communities as well. Well, it's rarely misinformation; it's more misunderstanding.
Yeah, lack of education and nuance. Yeah. And like you said, Dan, it's almost the image that comes in my mind is that the nettle and the dock leaf are in the same field together. Yes. They're there. The sting is there, but also the antidote to cut back. So they're blockchain tech absolutely disrupting the things that we are railing against. Of censorship, internet censorship. Big tech. Really controlling our data. And so I think getting educated about Web3. I always talk about this. It's so interesting. Even if you're not really called to, crypto per se, because that's what I always talk about. Crypto doesn't sum it up. There's Web3, there's tokenized real world assets. Understanding Web3, even as a little exercise, and maybe playing around with a Brave browser and how it's different, or doing your searches through pre-search. That's something we all do every day. Most of us anyway, unless we're fully off grid. We're not there yet, and know that may be down the line. Who knows? But that's something you can do and play around. Is just understand this different kind of ecosystem. Because in essence, Web3 is a shift about us controlling our data and us deciding, how we interact with the internet, rather than Web2, where we give and they take.
Yes.
Right. That's the model. And if you look at Brave or in pre-search, it's about decentralization, and it's about, I can decide how much advertising I get, but that's up to me. If I decide that, I'm part of the ecosystem. Because, through their basic attention token, I'm giving my attention to advertising. Therefore, I'm part of the ecosystem. Therefore, I get some of the revenue. And pre-search, same, you get revenue. So without having to get super technical, just starting to understand those models can really be interesting for you to understand that, this technological shift is happening. How can we, really kind of elevate the disruptive tech and support that and move towards it? Because adoption of that is what helps it grow. That's critical. It's there where we can use it, and then that's a big way of us resisting the big tech. And I always say, it doesn't. I'm kind of a more long-term vision man, Dan. Because I think this is a longer process all playing out. So rather than thinking pull that all down, those other things really quickly, understand they're going to exist, but I'm not going to be caught in them. I'm going to have other options. And that's where I think you can be creative and look at it and start moving towards other options and having more tools on your belt and understanding, because there's so much we can do.
Absolutely. And this is so crucial. It's so crucial, Sam. And the reason why I was saying around kind of the awareness being so important is because what often happens is terms like blockchain, cryptocurrency, digital assets, they get banded in the same area as central bank digital currencies. They're lumbered into the same corner. And as we've discussed at the earlier part of this episode, we can see how some of the technologies may be interconnected.
Yep.
However, this new financial messaging system will enable decentralized finance to accelerate. So actually growing awareness now around blockchain, decentralized finance, these are the solutions to the centralized control.
Yeah.
These are the ways that we can, it's no longer resistance, it's creativity. We will still need to resist. We will still have to ensure that, that we limit the powers of government. That's never going to go away. There's never a time in history where there's not been a government that hasn't had to be kept in check by its citizens. We're at a time post major health outcome that we, as with every major global event, there's always an accumulation of power and control. We can zoom out and see that. So we could have predicted that the very moment the whole game started playing out with COVID. We could have predicted. We couldn't maybe predict how long the thing would go on for in terms of the intensity, but we could definitely predict that at the back end of it, governments, central organizations, they're going to do their darndest to maximize the opportunity. They're going to take power and control. But this is where it's important for us to realize in the same conditions, we also have those opportunities. And, we were talking before the call today, I was saying I'm tired at the end of the week this Friday. I've got so many projects on because I'm sprinting right now. Yeah. Like now is the time to get moving because there is so much happening at such speed. And quite frankly, I feel like if I don't keep up with the pace of change, then I'm going to get left behind. And I can't afford to have that be a reality because all this centralized technology is going to continue barging along. Yeah. We got to get ahead of it. And this is our opportunity, which is why I'm so delighted to be bringing this conversation to the podcast, not just this specific one, but shining a light on the wider ramifications and doing it with nuance.
Yeah, totally. Because they're, one thing they are is very efficient at keep going and keep doing their plans, but they haven't got exclusivity on creativity. And I'd argue, actually, we are far more creative anyway, so we can harness that energy. And it's like if, the tech, it's an interesting debate around technology, isn't it? Because it's so intrinsic to a lot of our lives, unless we're fully off grid, and particularly in the West, is, I absolutely understand the school of I'm going to shoo it totally and go off grid, and I respect those people. Yep, if you're going to remain and use it, of course, I'd argue you can't hold back the technological advances, but what can you control? Your relationship with it. Because it's almost like we can blame the tech for everything, but how much is it actually down to me? Because it's almost like the smartphone idea. I totally, I know that a lot of us can be slaves to our smartphone, but whose fault is it really? Yes, they've designed something that's really addictive, and I always say this, I'm never defending their intentions and nefarious agendas at all. I think it's disgusting, but I do have to look at if I get my smartphone out 100 times a day, who got it out of my pocket and looked at it? No one poked to me and said, you've got to look at it. That was my choice. So I do have the power to transform that. And that is almost the mastery, isn't it, then?
Yes, it is.
It's the road to it. And also part of the kind of, and this is just me riffing on bigger ideas about life, that, this is the challenge and these are the right challenges. Would it be boring if we had no temptation? So it's like if you sat there with no temptation, no issues, and you had no challenges, what would be the point? My point is, I know I've got to get better at that. Therefore, it's there to try and hone me. It's the, I think I talked about on Wednesday that often in creation, there's a lot of people talk about three forces. There's the creative force and the denying force, and then the catalyst. But you need all three forces creation. Yes. The denying force plays a really strong role. And if you think about the kind of powers that shouldn't be as the denying force, they're the ones who are forging us in the fire, in a sense, by denying, so say central bank digital currency, if that's a kind of denying force, trapping, well, what does that lead to? Creation of other solutions. That's really, that was part of the equation. So that's really interesting to look at that. And I think it's your relationship with the technology. It's, grabbing it and not being passive, because I think that's the danger. If you're passive to the technology, you can become a victim of it. I use that word. A lot of people will be blocked and chained by blockchain.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And if we go back to the nettle analogy, I always remember my dad showing me when I was really young. You go back to nettles. If you grab a nettle, right? If you brush past a nettle, it'll sting you. Yeah. If you're passive, if you go and grab a nettle, full on, two things really go. It doesn't sting you. So that's part of the energy. I look at this shift. I understand this shift is coming. That's why I'm moving forward to look at it, grab hold of things that we can use for our benefit, rather than try and think I'm going to, like I give that analogy, hold back the internet in 2000 and, think I can stop it, and harness that energy and take it rather than be a passive. If you're passive, don't get educated about it. Absolutely, and sadly, a lot of people will become victims of it at some level. But it's in our power to really do things. So again, it's not the tech; it's our relationship with the tech.
Yes,
we should go for so many things. Dan, is our relationship towards something changes it. The same thing you can use freely, and the same thing can be an addiction. It's how you sort your relationship, and that's the kind of riches of the journey. That is challenging.
Yes,
really challenging.
Well, there hasn't been a single episode where we haven't come back to that point of personal empowerment and self-sovereignty. It's personal responsibility. You're absolutely right. Even if this thing here is buzzing away in my pocket, trying to get my attention, which it will do if I vibrate on the notifications.
Yeah.
It's prodding me, but I'm the one that has to decide whether I pick it up.
Yeah. If it gets to the point where somebody is coming, you're poking with it, then that is full on. That's gone too far. But you're absolutely right, Dan. It's your relationship with it, and I totally understand the get rid of the smartphone and the freedom that gives. And I know whenever I have a phone that's broken, I do feel extra freedom. So I understand that. But also I know it's my power. I could say, can I use it for what really benefit and help people? Because it helps, it's in tune with helping me on my particular calling or path of reaching more people or doing that. And then can I completely leave it home and don't take it out? Those are all things that I can think about and do.
Yes.
So rather than say, I want to stop this existing.
Yes.
Which is the kind of resistance of that resistance, which is just it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. We had Simon Elmer on the podcast recently, and he did a conversation with our Elevate members, and he talked about at his book launch. He's written about the kind of rise of the biosecurity state, the new normal. He's spoken heavily and written heavily about digital currencies, digital IDs, and he said at the end of his book launch, a good room of people who are all, wide awake, fully aware, and freedom seekers. His solution was this. He said, because he painted the potential darker reality of the kind of almost enslavement reality of the digitized world of digital IDs, central bank digital currencies, social credit. And he said, the only way that architecture can work is if you continue to be plugged into the matrix.
Yeah.
So he proposed the solution was, can you get rid of your phone? And he said it was like the Led Zeppelin, crashing, like lead balloon went down. Because the reality is, whilst it's true that this thing is the thing that enabled, and he said, why can't you just get a non-smartphone? And even then people were one or two people were yeah, I could do that. But most people were like,
I know, Dan, I've got a funny tangent, but as you said it in my mind, I heard Meatloaf singing, I would do anything for love, but I won't do that.
Yeah, it's totally that.
They're ready almost saying, I'll do anything but tell me, oh, I know.
Yeah, so you can have that entire bleak, fear-based projection of reality that you directly and distinctly oppose, but we can't give up the gratification that this thing gives us. Mm. But that's not a bad thing, and there's no judgment in that, because I can, quite frankly, so much of my life, my business, my media is contained in these devices.
Yeah.
They bring a lot of benefits to me.
Yeah.
However, there are decentralized phones. There are decentralized phone networks. There are now decentralized internet providers.
Coming.
So this is coming. We actually had a flyer through our door saying that I think it's Helium, that the new decentralized web network is being installed in our area. This is happening in tandem. So some people will decide that's enough. I'm unplugging.
Yeah.
And this does invoke, as you've already alluded to and touched upon, a deeper question, an important question. And this came up on Wednesday as well. What is our life all about? Mm-hmm. What's most important to us? How do we want to live? How do we want to exist? How do we want to thrive? Not just within these times, but more generally, because this is a deeper philosophical question. Technology, okay, it makes us more efficient, it does bring gratification, it does bring a whole range of benefits, but at what cost at the same time?
And what's your particular path? And I've got great examples of it, Dan, because I've seen people, I always say this, I fully respect it, and the ethos and the purity of, they've gone completely de-Googled everything, whatever, and then a lot of things that they had creative projects around, they were then locked out of and couldn't do. And again, it's this kind of way up of where the real value is. So again, almost from a sort of fundamental view, absolutely don't use that. But if, you're doing the greater good, by helping people, generally empowering people, whatever, was it better for you to sit in a vacuum going, I haven't, got involved in any of these technologies, I'm completely free of that, but actually I'm not on my path of connecting with people or sharing ideas or inspiring. So, but there are some people, actually, there is their path to go totally off grid, and they're going to thrive in that.
Definitely.
That's their calling. And part of, and I can relate to my own journey, Dan, because, I've alluded before, but I was on a real kind of raw food and juicing and cleansing lifestyle, a few years ago. So it really healed me from a lot of issues I had in my kind of 20s and 30s. And it was incredible. It was a paradigm shift for me. And I got very much in that feeling of, wow, cleanliness and, living in a sunny climate and just eating organic fruit. And I remember coming back to the UK, seeing my family and meeting another guy who was in that space. And he was actually a cleansing therapist and working with people. And I went to see him and we had this amazing chat. And he said to me at the time, this was 5-6 years ago, oh God, I really struggle this country, the kind of noise pollution. It was down the south of England, the kind of energy, the EMFs, the Wi-Fi. And I was like, yeah, me totally, because I lived in the mountains still and partly in Portugal. And it was really interesting, but he said, I was called to come back. So I'm called to help people in this harsh environment, which he viewed as a much harder way it was. And I can remember, Dan, it's really interesting because I remember feeling guilty, because at the time I was like, I couldn't, and I felt selfish, and because I was like, I couldn't, hats off to you, and that kind of like, oh God, you're on your path, but I so can't handle it. I need that, energy on my own, and, but I've shifted massively, and I'm kind of now relate to where he's at, which is, I'd argue this climate and the kind of food I get doesn't suit me to be my optimum, but it suits me to do what I've been called to do, which is, give talks and help people and connect. And so that's really interesting. That's the higher priority. And that means being more plugged in and using this stuff. So again, like, who am I helping by me going complete purist and sitting on my own going, versus getting involved with the tech? So that's just a first example of it, Dan, how actually maybe getting back in the weeds is where you can help people. And I'm not saying that you should, because all I'm saying is it's completely unique to where you are at any given time, and you have to weigh it up. So I always have an issue with anybody saying this is the way you got to go.
Yeah,
it's got to be personal, because somebody could be doing amazing work, and they use tech that you think is evil, but they're doing amazing work with it. They're not harming anybody. Whereas they could say, I'm not doing that, but that stops their kind of amazing work. So where is the, cost benefit analysis kind of thing, if you look at a business term?
Yeah, it's quite bizarre, really, because that term "you'll own nothing and be happy," which is kind of put forth by the WEF, that everyone kind of rejects against, but then some people are self-choosing that in the way that you described. But yeah, brilliantly, actually, Ram Dass in the 1960s, a spiritual leader, talked about the same concept, but in a very different way, and that is that people are coming back to themselves and recognizing this consumption life that we live is, drives this complete addictive behavior. But that's a whole different conversation. To me, what this comes back to is escaping binaries, this or that, and the extremes.
Yeah.
And that Puritanism, it's almost like this neo-Puritanism that you're talking about, which is again becoming pervasive in the culture. If you look at kind of the way that the vaccine rollout went out, that people took to vaccines with almost like a religious fervor. It was like fundamentalist. It became deeply Puritan.
Yeah.
And there's lots of authors have written about neo-Puritanism, and it's like we can reject that, but then we can end up embracing it ourselves in the opposite direction. Yeah. So to me, it's about it, rather than having this or that, it's both and. It's rather than restricting yourself, because that's you're self-imposing restrictions. You spent the last 3 years rallying against restrictions that have been imposed upon you, but then you've imposed restrictions upon yourself.
Yeah.
And that's always the problem. Self-limiting impositions that the human condition, the greatest barrier to our own freedom is not actually external freedom barriers, it's internal barriers.
Totally. And I think so many of us can probably relate to that kind of feeling of fight or flight in the last 3 years. I fully thought I was coming through England. Maybe, part of my thing was, I want to get out. I want to be on an island somewhere. I want to just hang out with the only people who know this is nonsense and, eat tropical fruit. But what's so interesting, Dan, is I don't feel that now. Like I thought that was where my path was, but almost the excitement for me, and I'm just always just speaking personally, is about working, in transmuting what's going on and being creative. And, would I really want to, and again, it's a false idea, because wherever you go, you take yourself and you'd have those challenges. But would I want to be just in a space where I had someone got complete off grid, had no issues about it, and I just let it go? Personally, I wouldn't. I feel cool to be in this creative energy of looking what's happening and trying to transmute it and help people. So, yeah, but I think we can all have that feeling when it got so intense of, get me out of here.
Yes, I've experienced it. There's one moment I thought, let's get out of the UK. It's hitting up, so it's getting crazy here. Yeah. But then the other part is me like, no, I'm going to have a family. I'm not leaving my family because of what they're doing.
And the irony for me then is I got out of the UK feeling that in a way in '96, and I've actually come back for the full craziness.
Yes, exactly.
And I've never. So again, it's completely fascinating as to how it's turned out. But I'm really happy to be here.
Yes. Well, there's two important pieces to that. So the first is, again, for those people who are looking for that off-grid, disconnected rather from the kind of digital world, and that's their true, authentic expression, then that's beautiful and magical. Yeah. That's totally congruent. It's totally authentic to what one's own internal desires are. And again, through the last couple of years, what the chaos has enabled some people to do is actually self-evaluate and self-reflect and realize that is what they want. Yeah. And that's wonderful. But there are other people who are feeling so overwhelmed and overburdened by the nature of the world that it's actually a form of escapism, because it's like system overload. Yeah. And then you may be making choices out of something that's not true to yourself or authentic. So I suppose the message I have is either is fine, but it's about how do you give yourself more choices and options within this. You can still live completely in nature and have a phone if you wish. It doesn't matter if you don't. Yep. But recognizing, the Simon Elmer comment, and we extrapolated on this when we spoke, is that whilst the digital architecture may be the building blocks for some of these really problematic things we've talked about, it's also the building blocks, as we've talked about, for the decentralized revolution that's in motion.
All in it, the full gamut, the full spectrum.
And the beautiful thing is the centralized authorities, institutions, individuals. The amount of times I hear a politician trying to talk about technology, it's laughable. They don't know what they're talking about. They quite clearly don't know what they're talking about. So the decentralized world is going to emerge much faster. Yeah. It's like what?
Totally. The worse the matrix get, the more flourishing things outside it will exist.
Definitely. I think about the ocean. You've got like an oil tank, all these giant boats trying to turn in the water. It's like you can't see it happening. It happens so slow. You get a speedboat, which like zoom, you can spin on a dime. So this is effectively what's happening. The new opportunities that are emerging are going to happen much faster. But that's why I said, like, I'm sprinting right now because I want to keep up. And by doing so, hopefully we can impart. And I know you're the same, as we can bring that awareness here, like now. And make it relatable to people, because I'm already reflecting back to the beginning of this conversation. I'm like, I was lost at ISO. Like, what are you talking about? Hopefully we've made that simple for people to understand. It's a financial mechanism that's underpinning the way that financial transactions are going to take place in this new modern system. Yes, it could lay the groundwork, and it will potentially lay the groundwork towards central bank digital currencies, but it's also laying the groundwork for all of the opportunities that are now becoming available to each one of us at such an electric speed.
Yeah, totally. It's forcing so many improvements. It's like if they're building a dystopian, prison, then why do you care about being locked out of it? You want to be you want to be outside of it. It's almost like I remember the kind of analogy of early on in the lockdowns where, the kind of fear we're going to be locked out of the supermarkets. Well, the same people are all people who pretty much in their lives thought, I don't want to go to supermarkets because they're corrupt and it's very easy to fall into, oh my God, we're going to be locked out of them. Well, we didn't want to go to them in the first place, but so it's for better habits. And I had a great story of a really dear friend of mine in France who, has small children, and it was really challenging because, finding things for them to do, and, got locked out of the cinema in France. In France, I was there for the first lockdown, extremely intense, much more intense than here. But of course, what happened was once you got over the kind of old habit of that's what we did, actually found a, kind of outdoor play area run by people that was kept open by people who had really good values because they were open and aware. So there's a great example. You could, in the first instance, go, oh my God, I've been locked out of that world. Well, you've been locked out of a kind of toxic, world that they created, and you're allowed to go and find better. So there's a real gift in it if you can see it in that way. And those are tangible examples. I don't think they're airy fairy, kind of glossing it over. That's real. That's tangible. That's a better solutions happened. And so all this stuff, the gift of them making the matrix so awful is that you've got to get out of it and do better things, and navigate within it, but also find better solutions. And that is the really the forging the fire and the improvement that it's driving in us.
Yes, and it does offer multiple pathways, as I've touched upon. It is an invitation for us to simplify our lives if we wish, if we choose to. But it is also an invitation for us to explore these new possibilities. Now, I want to touch on something there's a couple of threads that I think are important to bring to the table here, Sam. And I'll pre-frame one of the conversations by just cementing what some of the real key benefits are of decentralized technology. But I think one of the biggest concerns that certainly a number of our audience have already expressed is the barriers to adoption. It's the learning curve. All of this jargon, and one of our members of the program said they wanted to learn all the terminology around blockchain and crypto, and I said it's a notable goal, but there's so that there's dictionaries emerging. What do you need to know right now? It's breaking the learning curve down into bite-sized pieces and finding people that can help you on that journey, which is obviously what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, so a huge part of what we do, Dan, and I hope that's why, because as much obfuscation from a perhaps nefarious agendas happening in the mainstream one, there is this. It might not be on purpose, but this obfuscation and confusion with all the lingo in the alternative decentralized world, and it's so important to demystify that for people.
Yes.
Because again, I know that there's certain processes that it's almost they get a trigger word. It's crypto. It kind of switched off because it must be complicated, or it's Web3. I can't get my head around, and that's really empowering if you can start to understand it. And I would say if you can, a lot of people you absolutely can do it once you've got past that fear barrier of it must be.
Yes. But I think what precedes that is actually learning why it's important, because like anything, I've been podcasting now since 2015, and the first barriers were all the technical stuff. How do I record? What equipment do I need? I think I mentioned it on a previous podcast that we've done. All those technical limitations are actually in our mind. They're very real. We do need to learn the things. But actually, once you get past those, you almost forget that you were stuck on those things very, very quickly. So the important thing is to learn why it's important. So for me, when I look at what we're discussing here and this potential for a blockchain decentralized revolution, this really offers the potential for is a solution to the concerns that we expressed relating to privacy, security, civil liberties, all the things we discussed earlier. Now, the decentralized systems, they are designed to be transparent and secure. They are designed to give greater control to individuals over their financial life. It's important to understand that this new technology actually directly addresses the concerns relating to central bank digital currencies and more, which is why I believe it's important that we learn it. And so I totally acknowledge and feel into the learning curve. I feel it too right now. I've got lots of friends now who are immersing themselves in this world, and together we're exploring an uncharted territory around this new tech. We're trying to speak in terms of the world that we know and bring it down to stories and metaphors to help us understand it. But before you know it, it's no longer uncharted territory. It becomes known, which is why we called the podcast the Uncharted Territory Podcast, because both in terms of it is an uncharted landscape. We're in unique times, but we also want to shine a light on the territory so we can start to build a map of the world around us.
Make the invisible visible.
Yes.
Bring it into focus. And you're absolutely right, Dan. It's almost like, and you have to, I think the effort involved is you've got to take a step towards it. So it's almost like if we think about the centralized versions, the analogy that just come to my mind, they're like Uber Eats, they're going to be delivered to your door. Then that's why it works for a lot of people, because it's just going to come. If you're passive, that's what's going to come your way. All those solutions. The other ones, you're going to have to take a step out your door yourself and go and find it. So, rather than just have everything delivered and kind of that wave swept over you, you need to paddle out yourself. If you want to ride your own waves rather than be smashed on by a big wave on the beach, you're going to have to paddle out. And then you can transform that journey. So that is the shift of being passive or being, proactive.
Yes. So as always, the answer comes back to education, and the idea. I can imagine the fears amongst people now. I think about my parents, for instance. I mean, I even remember when internet banking first came on the scene. Like my parents were petrified about it, petrified. All kinds of fears around security, privacy, the technical barriers. Like they've got it on their phones now. They've got it on their phones. It's become second nature. And the same will happen. There's always an adoption curve. But here's the other point. You don't actually need to use the technology. But if you can help support it by helping others to raise awareness, that's the key. We've got to advance the proliferation of these alternatives that offer the solution. So that's why it again becomes a requirement to educate ourselves. It becomes a requirement for us to advocate for transparency and accountability. And that's true of all of the centralized impositions that are coming, not limited to central bank digital currencies, remembering that we do have the power to do that. We do have the power to help shape our collective future by working together. We've got to promote privacy enhanced features within everything that emerges. We've got to engage in public policy discussions. This again comes back to taking responsibility. And, again, with everything, for those of you who have followed the work that I've been doing over the last few years, I want to help lead that, of course. I want to be a catalyst. But the more of us that can take that spark and say, I'm going to play a role in whatever way I see fit to be part of the positive change and solution to all of this stuff that we're afraid about. But we can't get into that solution-oriented mindset if we're constantly afraid. We've got to recognize the fear for what it is, acknowledge it, dance with it, and then have the courage to move past it.
Yeah, because amplifying those decentralized and harnessing them is a way of fighting the centralized, without actually having to go. It's the old classic. It's like, diverting the energy rather than going I have that thing, rather than going toe to toe with the beast, is like absolutely that kind of, I don't know, is it, I'm going to get the wrong martial art, Aikido energy where you redirect it. So for me, it's like that huge shift of blockchain tech is coming. I'm not going to pretend I can resist it and say, stop it all and hold it all up. I'm going to redirect it towards, the positive ways we can use it and harness it. So that is the stepping towards it, Dan. And I think, you don't have to have that stress of I've suddenly got to understand the whole crypto market by next week. That's what I understand, that fear, especially with jargon. It is a journey, but some of the simple steps, which I would say to people, just switching your browser over is one little thing. Maybe a search engine, that could be your step this week, or it's going at a pace that works for you, which is again your path. It's got to work with how you do it. But you're what I like is that you're on a path to improving things.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. 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 So I'm going to be a little cheeky now and say, people, because I can imagine people say, where do I even start? I want to help share the information about what's happening. I want to help raise awareness. Hit the little share button. So a little plug. Hit the share button, because this conversation is the starting point.
Yeah.
This isn't a passive experience. You're here with us. We're exploring this together. We're all in it together.
Yeah.
So the more people, there's plenty of resources out there, but start by sharing this. Tell people about these conversations. People just aren't aware.
No. And I'm passionate about having conversations that are accessible to people who are completely new to the topic. So when you sit in a room, and that's what I'm experiencing on the talks I give, is that you don't have to come with anything to start to get a picture growing. And if a few things click, and that's what's exciting, it's like it is people going, I couldn't see it. And after a couple of hours, or even after a short time, I've started to see something, and that's what transforms it. Because when you can see it, you can then, it becomes tangible.
Yes. And you mentioned the Brave browser. I switched to Brave browser last year. It's one of the best decisions I've ever made. It's a decentralized web-based platform, for browsing the internet. So if you're using Safari or Chrome or Internet Explorer or Firefox, any of those, especially if you're using Google Chrome, because the interface is almost identical.
It's essentially a fork of Chrome. Therefore, I could imagine people on the call understandably watching this thinking, I don't want to get a crypto browser. I don't know about crypto. I mean, it's almost identical. It's identical, different, but it's got all these extra features about privacy and more control. And so it's also, Dan, it's not that you need to fully understand how it works, but just by getting it and using it, you're supporting, you've moved away from Chrome to that. So these are small steps, and also in a time, I highlight that it's not a lot of value, but you are understanding the ecosystem Web3. So you start to understand what this shift is about, because this shift is happening.
Yes, yes. So
already happening.
you've got the encrypted browser privacy advantages, but I'm just looking at mine now. I've just opened it up. 556,000 trackers and ads blocked.
Yeah.
That's my use. That's not that's not someone else's. That's mine.
Yeah.
8.92 gigabytes worth of bandwidth saved, which means I'm getting much faster access.
Yep.
7.7 hours of web loading time saved.
Yeah.
Plus, I'm getting paid for using it.
Yeah, and you didn't have to pay anything to set it up.
No, nothing.
So this is harnessing that whole ecosystem of Web3, and I think it is a great way in just to understand it. I know I've seen some of the comment on the course, and somebody said they were quite excited. They're like, I've got that Brave sorted. I'm on it, and that's be proud of every little step you take. You have
Definitely.
to. It's perfect everywhere. Wherever you are is the perfect place to start.
Yeah, you only reach the top of the mountain one step at a time.
Yeah.
So take that first step. Say, download the Brave browser if you haven't done it. I don't. We're not finding. I'm getting paid by Brave for using it. I'm not getting paid to recommend it to you. So it's. I don't know if that's a possible segment. Is there an affiliate? I'll have to look at that. We'll have to look at that if we're going to keep advocating for it.
But people don't. I say now, I'm sat here, myself, my family, my client. They're all getting. I get paid for browsing and searching the internet.
Yeah.
And if you don't, why not?
Yes, exactly. So it's a simple step you can take today. Now, before we kind of go into the final stages of the conversation, Sam, there's two big elephants in the room that I want to address. First, the excitement that we've shared around the decentralized revolution in parallel to the rise of the centralized kind of accumulation of power on an increasingly global scale. The big question always is, well, won't the powers that be shut this down? Isn't it a threat to the established order? And to me, it is clearly a threat to the established
100%.
order. So already the conversation, I know it's a much bigger conversation, so perhaps we just touch upon it for today, but it's one that we can bring to the next episode or further down the line, is around the fear around what the imposition of regulations on crypto, blockchain. And I think typically when people think about regulation, they think about the transactional nature of crypto as opposed to the deeper applications of blockchain and Web3. But I think that's something that is important to address because it clearly isn't a threat to the centralized modus operandi. What's your take on that?
Well, it's the main tool of control dressed up as protecting you. I mean, often we see that equation. That is it in a nutshell. So that's what we're seeing play out in the crypto space, is that this roadmap of regulation, which I've been talking about for the last couple of years as well, and I'm just watching it play out with curiosity, is that the messaging they give, Dan, and here's what's really interesting again, the mixed messaging. They are telling the layperson that crypto is a dangerous scam and it may be a bit of a fad and does it have a future, whilst they fully understand it's the baseline tech future of the world. And they're busy buying it and trying to control it and hold it. So that's how they play the game. Confuse you and tell you one message, whilst they absolutely understand at the top level what it is, and they're looking to just control it and regulate it as much as they can. So regulation will change the landscape massively, and of course, they'll always say it's regulating for your own safety. I give the example of, left to its own devices, we could create an incredible Web3 version of Uber and Airbnb. Uber and Airbnb in terms of a network, in terms of peer-to-peer, buy and selling of whether it's a rental room or a space in your car, is an incredible platform. But in a Web2 iteration, it's central control, central data being harvested, payments going through a central. So it's not really decentralized. Well, it's not decentralized at all. But you actually could build unfettered a completely decentralized version where it really is the payments are going peer to peer. The data you want to share is up to you, between you and the actual host or the driver that you need to, but only up to both in agreement. So that's all bedded into the tech, and that's what's incredible. But I'm not naive. I think people realize that that they don't leave that unfettered. They want to absolutely try and keep control as much as they can. So how that plays out, how it comes, is going to be fascinating to watch, Dan.
Yeah.
But obviously part of, not being scared away from these techs out of fear and understanding them is if we support them, that's one effort to, push back against regulation. And they can't control everything. A lot of it, they want to corral you out of fear, and so absolutely regulation is their huge tool. Always for your own safety is the messaging, but really it's about, it's about locking the smaller person out of the shift for their benefit, because really, permissionless blockchain is about everybody being banked at the level they want to be. and getting in at whatever level. So essentially, look at Bitcoin. You could own, £1 of Bitcoin, and you're in. They would probably rather have a system where there's a minimum investment. It's too dangerous for you, but if you've got 100 grand, you can come in. So that's what we're seeing with the banks at the moment. I got a message from NatWest this week. Now they're limiting your payments to crypto exchange even more for your own safety, and at the same time they're doing that to the retail investor, the man in the street. They're quietly changing laws to all their big institutions in the EU that they can start to hold much more crypto. Yes. So it's always this complete inverted message. Tell you that, well, we're doing the opposite. So absolutely, regulation is going to be fascinating to watch, and that's their tool, and we need to push back and see how we can navigate through that. But it's
yes. Well, simultaneously, again, there's always polarizing forces. The polarity always plays out, and here's where it gets interesting again, because historically, where there has been what seemingly are immovable government policy, entrepreneurship has been the thing. Innovation has been the thing that has moved that policy. Yeah. So ultimately, decentralized technologies are going to offer such wide benefit that they will become the de facto desired outcome, because it ultimately the 1% thrive on capitalizing on the financial opportunities that emerge. So it makes no sense to regulate technology that could have such infinite potential. The crypto conversation in the face of, when we're talking about a mode of exchange in the face of central bank digital currencies, yes, that's a tricky one. And there's a whole world of conversation around that, about how that could play out. But again, if you look through history, there's always been the ability to trade free from centralized systems. So that ability will continue, and it will become more sophisticated.
Yeah, and if it flourishes, I think if we can get it to flourish beyond a really niche thing, think about like the kind of internet, real niche cyberpunk move. If we can get it flourishing, because we know there are far many more people aware of the nefarious agendas now. If we can get those flourishing, what's interesting is that to crack down at that level, they always want to make it look like an organic journey that they haven't done overt tyranny. Okay, yeah. If they have to do overt tyranny to shut things down because it is starting to flourish, then the gift in that becomes more obvious to more people, and you get more pushback. Yeah, almost. So it's almost like, does that make sense? That kind of equation that I'm seeing that it's like now they're not going to ban everybody from getting involved in the crypto space because that's too obvious. Everyone goes, well, that's not fair. They're going to massage you out of there, or corral you out of there, so you think it was your own choice.
Yes.
So not us, but a lot of people thought I got out because of good info. So they don't want to, is my take. They want you to go down their road by tacit consent, even if you've been tricked into it. If they have to go absolutely, then that almost is an opening up of things from a freedom point of view. So there are all sorts of ways this play out, and that's why it's interesting. It's a shifting landscape, but it's not, as you always say, Dan, the road is not set.
Yes.
I think their roadmaps are quite, from all my study in many, many years, absolutely their roadmaps are set and they adapt it to what's going on. But how things play out is not set.
Yes. Well, of course. And the roadmap, again, it comes back to the opportunity being available for us to create our own roadmaps. This is about intention setting, goal setting. And again, that's where we started on Wednesday evening, where we were talking about, let's take stock of where we are now and determine where we're heading.
Yeah.
The old adage, and there's a great quote, and I don't remember the quote specifically or who even said it, but the essence of it is this: if you do not have a plan for your life, then somebody else will.
Yeah. They've got a plan. We know they've got a plan. Yeah.
Yes. So it always comes back is to what can you do, and how can you take personal responsibility? And some of the simple steps we've shared with you today that you can start with: share this video, download the Brave browser. Start educating yourself on these different concepts. It's gonna help you craft and shape and be part of the change that you're looking for. Yeah. And that's the essence. So, Sam, we're coming up to time. So, in today's episode, we've started by discussing this ISO 222. I mean, how do you even say that? Is it 20,022, 220? Yeah.
Well, if I had, it'd be interesting to if I had a record. How many times have I said it wrong? Even though I talk about 20, I think you go 20022.
That's right. I think you're supposed to say an individual.
Get it right, Dan.
Get it right. Okay.
If we were selling it, it's the ISO 20022.
That's what it is. Yeah. And what that is a new global standard that's replacing the SWIFT system for financial transactions. We explored how this technology could potentially underpin the central bank digital currencies and allow the possibility for programmable currencies on the basis of the more detailed information that it would enable those currencies to store. We delved into some of the risks and concerns around central bank digital currencies, including some of the threats to autonomy, liberty, and such. But we also discussed how these risks are counterbalanced by blockchain decentralization as potential solutions to these risks, and explored how, by taking responsibility for our own future, by getting ourselves educated, then we can start to be part of the change we wish to see in the world. And that really is the key for this podcast. It's helping to shine a light, helping you explore that uncharted territory so you can begin to navigate the changing world around us.
Yeah, and plot your own journey, make your own plans. There's always say they're not going to stop making plans overnight suddenly, but you can start making plans. Many of you already have, I know, but keep going. And if you haven't made any, begin.
Absolutely. And as always, if you'd like some help with that, then do look in the comments. We've shared a couple of options for you in terms of how you can continue your journey. Many of you have taken the Navigating Digital Assets course, which will help you understand a lot of this terminology we've been talking about today. It's a very simple self-study guide. And we've talked about the brand new Navigating the Financial Reset group that started just last Wednesday. Don't worry if you missed the first live with us. It's all recorded in the program. And our next call, Sam, is the Crypto Cafe session on the 5th of April. Yeah,
we'll be diving more into crypto. And that's really important. The Q&A is so valuable there because people can come from any angle just with the confusion and where they're at. And I always say, don't like the word safe space because it kind of conjures up kind of world. Courageous space.
Yeah, courageous space.
But you don't actually be courageous because, I always say, no questions too basic. But it's about having the discussion. And what I found is often I'm there facilitating and having that, but people learn so much, even just listening to other people's questions and what comes back. So you don't have to be super able to go and ask a question, but just by being there, you pick up so much stuff and get so much more meat on the bones of this topic. And, sort of sum up by we're bringing the invisible, making it visible, and then you can go from there.
Yeah, I mean, just to conclude on a highlight, one of my favorite parts about Wednesday's session was to seeing the shift in people's body language, the smiles, the connection. It's that's what happens when you have those breakthroughs, those light bulb moments. And hopefully you've had some of those today listening to this episode. And if you'd like to continue the journey with us, obviously we're here every Tuesday on the Uncharted Territory podcast, Sam. I never guessed to slip again. But also, if you'd like to find out more about some of the things we've just discussed, just look into the comments. We've got the links there for you if you'd like to continue your journey with us. Sam, brilliant conversation as always. Looking forward to our next one.
Wrap up the week and have a nice restful weekend. Maybe put the smartphone in a Faraday bag and go into nature. I think that's where I'm.
Yeah, I'm up for that. Yeah, we're heading. Yeah, definitely. So, in closing, if you haven't done so already, you've made it to the final minute of this episode. Hit the share button. You've come this far. Help us spread the word. Help us shine a light on these important topics. And do let us know in the comments what you thought about our discussion today. If you have any further questions about what we've covered, or there's elements you'd like us to explore more, or other topics you'd like us to bring to the conversation, do let us know in the comments on whatever platform you're watching or listening on, whether you're on YouTube or one of the decentralized platforms, or on Apple or Spotify. I don't think you can leave comments on those. In fact, you can on Spotify. Wherever you're listening, leave us a comment, let us know, and we'll be sure to pick up the thread on our very next episode of the Uncharted Territory podcast.